APAN. So as probably you may know that APAN Secretariat is in Sri Lanka, so he's the director for that, and also he's a faculty member of University of Peradeniya. And also we have Wellington Pereira. So Wellington, are you here? Oh. So Wellington is a cloud solutions architect for Microsoft, so Microsoft APAC. And thanks Wellington as well. Then we have Mohammed Mustali, right? Oh yes, Mustali, and he's the head of data center at Mobitel. Yes, thanks Mustali for that. Also we have Tarindu Mipegama, and Tarindu is also actually, he's a consultant as well. He has a lot of expertise in the area as well. So we have a very good, oh yes. Sorry, I think we, probably maybe we might need to, oh maybe we can put another chair here. Yeah. We can put one here, and do you want to sit here or you want to sit in the middle? What do you prefer? Okay, yeah, that's fine. All right, yeah, we'll do that. Maybe. Yeah. Is it coming? Okay. Maybe if we can create some space in the middle here. To this way, to this way. Yeah, you can put it here. Yeah. Yes. Okay, and over to you, and you got enough mics, right? Okay. Thanks very much, and let's have a good discussion. And feel free to ask questions. And first of all, of course, panelists will share their experiences in the area, and you are welcome to ask questions and be interactive.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are here to discuss and learn from the experts here on cloud computing. So we, our experts are here. It has been introduced by Champika. And to start with, I'll have a small analogy. We know the hybrid cars now are so popular, cars that we use today. But when the hybrid cars were there about a couple of years ago, many were very skeptical in using the hybrid cars. Some people said the batteries would not live for long, and we'll have to spend a lot for maintaining the batteries. And sometimes if an accident is there, that would cause huge electrocution for the passengers inside. So like that, there were so many skeptical ideas about the hybrid cars. Now it is all gone. Now everybody is crazy about hybrid cars. So that's how the technology, the future goes on. So I believe it is the same happening to the cloud computing also. Nowadays, still not many are very positive about going into cloud. Still some are very negative and skeptical about going to cloud. So that's why we are here to discuss about the cloud computing, where we have the experts with us who can explain their views and thoughts about cloud computing. Start with, I just would like to ask Dr. Nimar, why do you think a company or a big organization like a bank should migrate into cloud computing?
Okay, I think I am not a salesman for cloud computing, but I will, coming from the academic side, I will give reasons why institutions or even small companies should consider cloud computing. I think it boils down to lower total cost of ownership. It's, in order to deploy a server, you have to have hardware, you have the headaches of maintaining the hardware, you have to house it in a proper place, power, air conditioning, etc. And every few years you have to renew the hardware. And all those hassles are gone if you use cloud computing. Of course, connectivity is a big issue, but the connectivity is so cheap nowadays, it's almost negligible. So the total cost of ownership is going to be really very low. Also, things that you say deploying a new server. If you are going with physical servers, you have to buy a machine, connect it somewhere. But with virtualization and cloud, it's so easy to deploy a new server, keep a copy of your current server. You can even migrate your server from one provider to another. So those, I think, once you get hooked, I think there's really no return.
Tarindu, now you are a data center expert. Now, how do you think you can answer this question? Why an organization should move into cloud?
So I think Dr. Nimal touched on most of the reasons as to where the benefits are for an organization of moving into a cloud. One other thing that I'd like to add to Dr. Nimal's list is that for most companies, IT is not their core business. Maintaining a server room, running a data center, maintaining SQL databases, the actual installation is not their core business. And by moving to cloud, you actually get to offload all those IT hassles to someone else whose business it is to run IT infrastructure, and you get to focus on your core business.
Right. So as they say, the advantages are that the efficiency and the cost advantages, all are there. But at the same time, there will be issues in security. This is the most highly talked about concern when it goes to the cloud computing. So Wellington, can you say how do you say this cloud computing is secure? Because most of the people feel it is still insecure.
Really? See, security is a very, it's not a definitive thing, right? It's simply based on how you look at it. Security, what you consider as secure today may not necessarily be secure in a day, in a month, because you have to keep doing this. People who try to get into your systems, access your data unethically, or in other words, hackers, always become smarter day in, day out. So security is a very much an ongoing practice. Now, when it comes to securing our data centers or in-house or in-basement server racks, the practices that we have to implement to safeguard that, plus for a large corporation who provide cloud at a massive scale, the practices they have to run are pretty much the same. But then the cost of doing that at a smaller scale versus larger scale, per unit cost becomes a very interesting conversation, right? So obviously there's a limited budget that you can spend on implementing security in your organization's infrastructure, but then is that your core job function like our previous panelists mentioned about? So it's a ever-evolving thing. Now, if you look at what these large cloud solution providers or cloud infrastructure providers do, they have dedicated teams running their secure infrastructure 24/7. Can everyone afford to run it at the same affordability or same scale at any given time? It's quite challenging. If you take an example, how Microsoft runs security, we have teams deployed who are constantly hacking into our data centers, but teams who are also deployed to make sure they are safeguarded at any given time. So it's a ever evolving constant practice. So the challenge of doing that at a small scale would be one reason why everyone should look at public cloud or large scale cloud as an alternative. So the question on which one is more secure or whether public cloud is really secure is not really the question that we need to understand. It's actually how we continually invest on securing our infrastructure is what we need to look at, because it's never a thing that you can fix today and it'll be fixed forever. You fix it, you have to constantly keep on looking at it. Cloud vendors, be it Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and other providers, can invest continuously doing this because these are core business. But a typical business who's on another vertical, another line of work, that's not their core business. So it's quite challenging to do that. So I hope that answered the question.
So in that line, now we have Mustali, who has already implemented cloud solutions in his organization. So Mustali, how did you face the challenge? What are the difficulties you had in going into cloud?
Thanks for Chambik and organizing committee to give this opportunity. There are two aspects once you consider the cloud, either a public or private. So depends on your application requirement. You have to choose the response time and the application nature with the given IoT sensors and all that, but the presentation has been given. So you have to choose the appropriate private cloud or the public cloud. So we believe that most of the telco operators are moving towards the private cloud. It is more beneficial to them in terms of the application response time to the telco nodes. So the challenges what we face during the private cloud implementation was the network automation. So when it comes to network automation, implementing software-defined network and the network function virtualization will automate the network infrastructure in our data center. So when it comes to software-defined networking, we have a challenge that whether we should go with the overlay network or underlay network. Simply, the overlay network means that you run your topology or your network requirements on top of existing infrastructure layer. And in the sense of the underlay networking, that you may have to control the physical devices where you differentiate with the control plan and the data plan, and you give the application the resource requirement need in that sense. So the easiest path to implement in the sense that the overlay network is, again, it's easy to implement top of the existing infrastructure. So that's what we have focused. But the challenge is, the upcoming challenge is that it's to be implemented with both overlay networking and the underlay networking together, so that the application requirement may tolerate the response time and the application needs and the elasticity scale of the network resources will utilize this. So on top of that, if you consider the network function virtualization, you need to differentiate between the tenants and the overlapping IPs between the tenants to provision the virtual data centers to the corporate customers. So those are the challenges that you can overcome with the network function virtualization. So I believe that the upcoming world with the Internet of Things, that you need to have a user-driven demand infrastructure to scale out and give the response time to the market needs.
Thanks, Mustali. Now you have you managed to put some areas of your applications into cloud. So what is your future plans?
Yeah, obviously that our future plans are confidential with regard to. I'm not authorized to speak about the future plans, but
you can say in generic
in terms
terms,
of the challenges that the future challenge would be, the users are even the campus university students, they need to have a development portal to develop the application and deploy the application in any Androids or the Apple OS and connect their application to the network operators or the mobile application forms. So they don't want to sit here and there and ask for a physical communication. So that we are focusing on the seamless infrastructure that will lead to the application end users to develop the IoT application or whatever the devices that they have and deploy them itself. without any physical communication, they can log into the portal and deploy the mobile application, and that the response time or the application requirement from the telco sector nodes will be given automated. So that's the trend that we are focusing.
Okay, thanks, Mustali. Now, one other thing which always comes to the mind of cloud computing, migrating from on-premise to cloud, the big volumes of data. How can you transfer all those big volumes of data into cloud? That will be a Himalayan task, I think. Tarinder, how can you contribute to that?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, what we talked about, migrating your workloads from your on-premise to cloud, essentially the workloads have not changed. The applications, the requirements of storage and all of that has not changed. And when you start migrating, the cloud service providers need to make sure that they have the infrastructure, the bandwidth, as you mentioned, and not only the bandwidth, but also the processing capability, the power, the cooling, and all those requirements which are required to take these multiple workloads from multiple tenants and still be able to service it properly. In terms of connectivity and bandwidth, and yes, there is a significant amount of data, and I believe that there are other panelists who are better suited to talk about it, but I just like to take this opportunity to say, since this is a network operator forum, and since there are operators here present who are building their own cloud infrastructures with the aim of hosting cloud infrastructure in Sri Lanka, you need to really start kind of thinking about the volumes of data that we're going to get. I mean, day by day, every single company is automating manual processes, and that means day by day, you're having bigger and bigger storage requirements and processing requirements. And as a service provider, being in the service provider space, if you want to be a cloud provider as well, of course, it's going to be difficult to compete with the likes of Microsoft or Amazon. But there is definitely a market for local cloud service providers because of regulatory requirements and so on. And if you want to gear up for that, then you need to start thinking about building your infrastructures to support your clouds, because now no longer do companies have to build data centers themselves or hire network analysts and network staff themselves, but as the service provider, you need to start doing that, and you need to be ready for that.
Thanks, Tarinder. Now, how can you answer that, Wellington?
I was anyways going to kind of give a comment on what he just mentioned. See, I don't think it's a question of whether the local cloud providers can compete with the multinational cloud providers. There's always a big play for the local ecosystem. I mean, obviously the data governance laws or the policies come into play because several industries, especially finance, healthcare, always have a governing law saying high business impact data needs to remain in country. Anywhere, I mean, across the world that you travel, most countries adhere to these kind of practices. So the only option is to work on the local telco infrastructure to use these services. But then there's another side of the story. For the application developers, for software companies or ISVs, when they want to deploy their services in country, I'm a big fan of supporting the local tech companies or local ISVs hosting their first node in the local telco infrastructure because of the latency issues. There are a couple of good case studies in the local market where very high throughput applications are actually, the first node is hosted on a local telco, but their backup, DR, etc. is on a public cloud. So it depends on how you architect the solution to cater this requirement. It's never a question of whether you can compete. Price point, yes, the multinationals could always bring it lower because of the economy of scale that we talk about. But then there's a different play that the local telcos can definitely add. On the volume of data, maybe bringing down the cost a little bit to upload this initial volume, large, massive volumes. I mean, I have faced situations where once the data store is up and running, the database is up and running on the cloud, it could be a couple of $100 a month, but getting that data volume, several terabytes into that store, the bandwidth utilization cost goes up to several $100,000 rupees or a couple of $1,000, which doesn't make sense, which is a blocker for most customers to start using cloud. So if you maybe do something on the initial migration, a lot more customers would be very receptive to go to cloud.
That's a very valuable point, I think, Wellington. I think that point, if we can do something about, I think that will help a lot of other organizations, migrating into cloud. Mustali, you have any views on that?
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the public cloud, if you take what happened recently in India, so India government has allowed, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Gyandais, India has allowed them to deploy their application to the cloud after the Amazon has launched their data center within their country.
Yes.
So that one point. If you take the USA, like developed countries, they are going instead they are going for the public cloud, but only the condition is that the public cloud is hosted within their country. So that was the reason that I think they are also now planning to implement cloud in Sri Lanka. I believe that they are in the process. So what I believe that based on the regulatory compliance, there are banking sector applications and there are telco sector applications there. We have to follow up the compliance and the regulatory compliance, and also the cost effective. The bandwidth comes into the picture. Where you have the data center within your country, you can push up your data as much as possible. So I believe that moving up or implementing a cloud within our country with multiple data center will certainly push the private and the public sectors into moving to the public cloud. Even I believe that Microsoft also should have a plan to put up their data center, one of their data center cloud like Amazon.
Welcome news, yes.
In Sri Lanka, so that we can focus on our DR side or whatever the disaster recovery side with the given or guaranteed response time for the application or like mobile applications. So that we hope that in the coming future, very soon, we will have a public cloud within Sri Lanka. It may be from any of the vendor like Microsoft or the Amazon or whatever. So that makes the compliance to the telco or banking sector industries. So that is my prediction.
Thanks, Mustali. Yeah, go ahead, yes.
Musali, absolutely 100% I agree with you. And also something that that we need to consider, again, as local data center providers, as local co-location providers, network operators, and so on, is that at the moment, unfortunately to say, like I've worked with most of the major data centers and co-location providers here, including some of the newer facilities which are coming up or have just recently rolled out. Unfortunately, even still, the data centers that we're building in Sri Lanka can't support the kind of densities that Amazon or Microsoft uses. So I don't know how conversant everyone in the room is about power densities and things like that, load per rack. Amazon, recently I was fortunate enough to work on a due diligence study with them in a different country. Each one of their racks consumes 20 kilowatts of power. There is not a data center in Sri Lanka at this point in time that can handle that. So absolutely, I 100% agree with you that, an Amazon endpoint here, an edge extension here, or a Microsoft Azure edge here would definitely increase the adoption. And I urge you as service providers to start building the infrastructure that will enable them to, they can have just one Microsoft rack or one Amazon rack just to extend their edge without having to invest in a new data center. But if you do, just let me know.
Okay. Doctor, do you have any view in that? Okay, so now Dr. Nimal is a person who is very much conversant with the open source technologies in the cloud computing. Doctor, can you shed some views in that?
Yes, actually, almost all my experience in terms of virtualization cloud has been with open source. I have used some of the commercial services. So, and I'm also taking part in some of the training of engineers to build their cloud services, private or public. So I think currently there are a number of alternative technologies that you can use for virtualization. I think most of the public virtual public cloud services are also based on maybe modified versions of these open source technologies. When it comes to the basic level, the hypervisor level, we have Zen and KVM, and then of course services are built on top of that. And let me just see whether I have forgotten some. So at the lowest level we have Zen and KVM, and then at the next level you have management and orchestration tools like libvirt from Red Hat, and then QEMU, etc. Google Ganeti also has contributed a lot. Ganeti basically runs on top of KVM and Zen. There are various high-level open source offerings like OpenStack, which is basically kind of a solution that you can buy from various vendors, and the more open version of that called Open Nebula, and there's something called Overt that is offered by, again, Red Hat. I have, these are only a few names that I could remember, but there's a lot of open source technology, and many of the commercial cloud services that are being offered do use this technology.
Any others want to comment on the open source applications on cloud? On open source applications used in the cloud. Okay. One thing which always intrigues me is this open source technology. When you say, again, people think when it's open source, it's not secure. So how do you think, when putting this open source into cloud, will that be secure enough?
I do not think that is really a valid concern, because whether it is open source or a proprietary solution, cloud, you are basically using a service, and the technology that they use for providing that service is really should be transparent to you. I mean, Amazon Web Services could be using some technology, and it has come to the orchestration tools and management tools have come so sophisticated that the underlying technology is really transparent to you now.
Tarindu, how do you reckon that? Being a data center expert, do you recommend going with open source, or what is your view?
So I apologize, Subhash. My expertise in data center, I mean, like I say this to people all the time, right? You can run open source, or you can run something proprietary, and it can run on a HP or Dell or a Cisco server, but at the end of the day, you need a room that has cooling and power and connectivity, and that's really where I come in. I work at the bottom of the triangle, but the one that everyone needs, no matter what it is.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit back to Mustalib. Mustalib, now since you started your moving to cloud, what were the initial barriers you had moving to cloud?
Yeah. So now the capital cost. I mean, when we are moving to the cloud, we have planned for the kind of the initial stage was whenever the systems are aging out, instead of procuring a new system, we have segregated the application where we can move into the cloud, and then we have planned accordingly with the capex and the opex budget, and then implemented the cloud. So as I told you earlier, the cloud, you have to select certain application where it should be run in the cloud. I mean, cloud in the sense of all the resources are elasticity usage. So that if you take, there are resource sensitive or sensible application that you should run it on the typical system. On the other hand, where the resources are elasticity movement, you can move into the cloud. So it does not mean that it all depends on the application response time and the service level assurance that you give it to the customer. So we plan accordingly, and we design the private cloud where we can move some of the platforms into the private cloud. And then there was a very, as I told you, in between deciding on the software-defined networking technology, the architecture, whether we should move into the overlay or underlay. And on top of that, we have to implement the network function virtualization. So as Professor Gihanda has told us that we should take care about the user's end-wise security, so the tenant-wise. So that we had a challenge on filtering out the east-west traffic instead of north-southbound. So we had initially IPS, IDS, all the components to monitor the traffic between north and south. But when we move into the cloud, or private cloud or the public cloud, the east-west traffics are very important. So you need to go for a micro-segmentation level firewall or the layer 7 firewall in between the east-west traffic, monitoring the east-west traffic, or kind of avoiding security holes. So there are many vendors coming up with the L7 firewall capabilities where you can monitor the east-west traffic. Those are the concerns that we face during our cloud implementation.
Right. So those are the technical point of difficulties overcoming. Wellington, can you add on your views on overcoming the difficulties like the mind change, like most of the top ranking who are not IT savvy, they are always against going into cloud. How do you overcome that?
So I actually remember about 2.5, 3 years ago on a similar panel discussion, we spent a lot of time trying to understand this particular issue. It was not a matter of availability of cloud services. There were local telco-driven cloud, there were multinational offered cloud. The services were available. But then the mindset of people or these decision makers on adapting cloud, because you can't see it, you don't know where your racks are, then you don't know who's managing security, and you don't know who can access your data or any of these. So then changing gears to put your data in somewhere else was the biggest challenge a couple of years ago. But now most of the C-level who kind of see these content day in, day out, who experience the value of cloud services and the agility that it could bring into their businesses, are very positive on moving on to cloud. But we still have a lot of work to do at the SME and or middle scale enterprise level. There's a lot of, in terms of awareness on why cloud is a significant value adder to their business, we have a lot to do as operators to educate them why that is a more lucrative option than spending money to build server or data centers. So that would be my number one point. Then the second part is, we can't offer cloud, the local operators or Microsoft or Google, Amazon, we can't offer cloud if we don't have applications for our customers to consume. I mean, our end customers would not just buy a server rack and keep it doing nothing, right? We need application partners in the market, so they build things which is cloud ready, which is multi-tenant, which is scalable, so people can start using them as a software as a service. There's a lot of movement in the market among the application developers gearing up their applications towards this, but we could have done this much faster at a bigger scale 3 years ago, seriously.
Oh, that was nice views. I just want to again shift to Tarindo. Now, what kind of a data center infrastructure concerns will a local service provider have with the trend of cloud applications or adoption of clouds?
Yeah, so I mean, as I've mentioned a few times earlier as well, the thing that service providers need to understand is, and these are things that Microsoft and Google and Amazon have already understood in their more mature cloud infrastructures and things like that, is that you start selling a different kind of service, right? So let me just backtrack a little bit to answer that question. As far as moving services off premise goes for customers, what's been around for a long time is co-location. You move your servers, your physical servers, they're sitting in your office, you just move them into a data center that's run by a service provider, right? Now, but that hardware is still yours. If a server breaks, yeah, okay, your service provider will have someone there that can maybe swap out a drive or do some basic level stuff, but the ownership of that equipment is yours. So what cloud has given us the opportunity to do is to abstract that as well. And now we can actually not have any hardware and just run our services, run our applications, whatever is necessary. Now, what the service providers need to understand is that, yes, before you were sort of in a real estate business where, you know, a customer said, I have 5 racks in-house, I want to move 3 of them out, so you just give them space for 3 racks. But now with people moving into cloud adoption, what service providers need to start focusing on is, in their existing data centers that has 100 racks or 150 racks, whatever the number is, how do you fit as many customers as possible into those racks? So that means deploying more higher density servers. I mean, you know, there's hyper-converged computing now with Nutanix and all of that. And to be able to do that, your infrastructure, your base level infrastructure, like I said, what I look at, your cooling, your power in terms of your generators and all of that needs to be up to that standard. And unfortunately, the feeling that I get is that our service providers are a little bit behind the curve, and we're still catering to, okay, customers will move their entire hardware over. And by all means, the service providers on the sales and marketing side have a very valid reason for doing that, because as Wellington said, you know, customers don't want to move. Even now that the C-level want to move to cloud because they've seen all these value additions and all of that, now the IT departments are worried, right? You know, an IT department of 10 people, when there's not a single server in the office, what are 10 people going to do, right? So even service providers, just because they want to still preserve the IT departments, they say, look, move your service, so you still need your IT department. In case something goes wrong, they have to come and attend to it. You know what, we'll give them space to sit in our data center as well. 3 guys can sit, and you know, they can maintain, watch your servers and make sure they run okay. Now with cloud, you don't need that. And also, for just responding to something that Wellington said as well about the hesitation for migration, we need to retrain people as well. We need to retrain IT departments, people who were, you know, just taking care of servers, to learn about cloud orchestration, automation, and things like that, so that they can be useful when after the companies have migrated to cloud. And that's also something, I mean, setting up centers of excellence and so on, that service providers can do to enhance their business as well.
Any thoughts from you, Muttalib or Wellington, in that line?
What needs to be said is said.
Yeah. Okay. So going in the same line, now how can a service provider gear up to maintain its market share?
I think actually Wellington already answered that question. It's basically by, I think Mustali maybe was, I mean, the trend, obviously, it seems to have, like, we seem to have skipped a bit of a generation, right? And I think in one of the previous presentations, you talked about how things change so fast. You don't make a 1-year plan or a 5-year plan anymore. You make a 6-month plan now, right? And it seems that the whole thing of outsourcing your data center has gone straight into, let's put everything on the cloud. And that's much easier. So what service providers need to do is not to lose out on that market share. And I mean, rightly, as was mentioned earlier, that there are certain regulatory compliances which will keep certain data in-house. But at the same time, regulations can change, and basing your business strategy on a regulation that can change overnight is probably not such a great idea. You know, so suddenly the government says, okay, fine, you can have data outside of Sri Lanka. I mean, like even now banks, right? They're not supposed to have their core banking data outside of Sri Lanka, but majority of them have now gone to HR on the cloud. Yeah. You know, because that's not account holder information. So service providers, as long as they gear up, as long as they make it attractive for even global cloud vendors, Rackspace, Amazon, you know, all those guys, to set up points of presence here, I think they can still maintain their business and at the same time enable people to move to the cloud and make it less of a barrier of entry for people to move into the cloud.
Doctor, you have any views in that line? From you?
I think the key to this whole question of market share is innovation. how fast these operators or cloud service providers can innovate new capabilities, new features on their cloud platform would be the key, the way I see it. I mean, look at what's happening on data science right now, or artificial intelligence right now around the world. The cloud vendors who are innovating fast on commoditizing these things into services that the general public or the average developer can use are ahead of the curve in terms of adoption on these services. And simply identifying what would be that next key demand area, plus building the service capabilities and delivering that would be the key to gaining more and more market share. I mean, if you look at the local ecosystem, I don't know how practical it is to build a set of AI services because the volumes are not there, but we can still do a lot with the application providers, so we offer more and more services through our local telco infrastructure to our local customers. Then automatically the consumption will go up, and then which leads to market share increase.
Mustari, you have anything to share?
So in my perspective now, in the cloud technology, if you take the cloud technology, so it has to be still its upcoming merging situation. Now, if you take the, for example, the uptime. So I think none of the cloud service provides a 4.9 uptime, maybe for certain application other than that. So I don't see any, if you take the Amazon, they give only 99.9 uptimes. And if you take Microsoft, I believe it's 99.95. So if you take the telco sector users, that when you top up for 100 rupees, we cannot give you a response after 5 minutes. So we need to give you a response within milliseconds of 1 or 2 seconds maximum. So that it depends again. It depends, like if you take the email services, that you can host it in a public cloud with the compliance to the legal department, whatever. But in certain application, you need a high response time where you need to have within the country or within your premises to respond to that such requirement. In coming years, so I believe that the cloud providers will come up with an uptime of at least 4 to 5 nines, so that the application owners or whatever the service level assurance can be given to the users. Now, users are, they will never wait for few seconds even. They need a response time. As soon as they upload it, they need a response. If they wait for even for 1 minute, they said, okay, there's something wrong with this service provider. So it has to be still emerged. Also, the security perspective, they have more improvement on the security perspective. In terms, again, the east-west traffic, they have to more improve on the east-west traffic. They have to provide as a security as a service maybe in the future upcoming level. But I believe that some of the cloud providers they are providing it. So what my view is to say that now the world is user-driven demand. User will divide how much response time that I needed. So the service provided should be take care of, okay, if you need a response time or service level assurance, you go to the gold, platinum or gold, platinum support, or the infrastructure, we give the response time. So it's a user-driven world. So the service providers and the network operators has to adapt to the user-driven environment and applications. So that's my view on user-driven world.
Okay, thank you, Matalis. Now, so I think we have probed enough. Coming closer to a few remarks, which I want to say about is Gartner's view. Now, Gartner already says that there is a business of $100 billion in cloud IT spending as of now. It may go up to even 500 billion within a period of another 4 or 5 years' time. So that's the way the technology is growing. Now we have these cloud solutions which we all know. But in about 4 or 5 years' time, there will be a leap change, I think, will happen in this arena. Doctor, what do you think will be the next in cloud?
I am not a fortune teller, but I can talk about maybe the recent, the current trends in terms of building the building the cloud. So not not from the user side, but at least from the cloud builder side. In the past years, we have seen a shift from pure virtual machine technology into what are called containers. Basically, if I may take some time, if you take the machine, the hardware, you run some sort of a kernel on that. So that we call the host operating system. And then on top of that, we run a set of virtual machines. So if you have, say, one piece of hardware and say 5 virtual machines running on it, those 5 virtual machines will, if you are using conventional virtual machines, those 5 virtual machines will run again another kernel. So we have the host kernel and then a set of guest kernels running. Now, at the time this technology was introduced about 10 years ago, the Linux kernel lacked some features actually, but in the recent years, 2 features called control groups and namespaces. Those features were added into the Linux kernel, and now it is really possible for what are called containers to run without running several virtual machines, several kernels for virtual machines, but basically rely on the base kernel and still provide fairly good control of how resources are allocated between these containers, and also how these are separated from each other. This is actually, I think, if I am not mistaken, this is even Microsoft is now offering container services. So I see it as, it's obvious. You are unnecessarily running a number of kernels, and now you can do basically the same thing without running so many kernels. Of course, the disadvantage is there is the degree of separation between containers is not as great as the degree of separation between virtual machines, because they were running their own kernels. So there is a debate as to the containers are secure enough, whether the containers can provide you the same level of security that you are able to offer with VMs. But I think that makes a lot of sense, and also another limitation is that since we are using only one kernel, the containers also have to be the same type. I mean, with virtual machines, you could have a Linux host operating system, and you could run, say, Windows or FreeBSD or whatever, virtual machines on top of that. But with container technology, you have basically, you are limited to one OS, that is the host OS.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, Wellington, I think you have something to say in that, since he was mentioning about your Microsoft platform as well.
Okay. Well, see, containerization is a kind of a must-do thing right now for any cloud service provider, regardless of the platform, because every customer is trying to figure out what is the lowest cost option to run their applications on cloud. So containers is a more logical choice in that trend. Yes, you can have miniature virtual machines, but containers provide a much more sophisticated kind of only needed resources to run an application. And then auto scaling up, scaling down, or kind of mass creation of these containerized machines. Yeah, that's the way to go. So you very correctly you pointed out that, sir, that in your original question on what would cloud be for the next few years, I think you already gave the answer. None of us are fortune tellers, so I mean, I look at it this way. See, most of the technologies that I work on today did not really exist 3 years ago. Most of the AI technologies, machine learning, theoretically they had been there, but the commoditized versions of these did not really exist 3 years ago. When the cognitive services, all the IoT capabilities that we have on cloud or data science stuff, So it's a fascinating world, to be very honest. So I don't know what will happen in 3 years down the line, but few things for certain. So AI or artificial intelligence will play a significant role in pretty much everything that we do, because our customers are now looking at those futuristic solutions where they want to predict their businesses. They want to understand more and more insights about their data. So that'll play a vital role during the next few years. But also things like natural language processing or NLP will have a significant play on cloud. Reason, and machine learning as well. See, if you look at it, these theories had been there for decades now, but now is the only time that we have enough data to look at and understand these insights and understand patterns and build more capabilities on top of it. So it's evolving at a mad rate, to be very honest. I mean, the massive data centers have now gone to a yottabyte scale, so our AIs can learn a lot on those. So next few years will be significantly on AI, the way I see it.
Tarindu, I think he is waiting to say something on future.
So unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball either. But one thing that I have seen, and even some projects that are going on, even in Sri Lanka, is the adoption of IoT and how that will also expand the requirement for cloud services. Even currently, there are projects going on where there are developers, property developers, that are talking about not having a traditional building management system, but having everything as IoT sensors, so that, you know, everything from your CCTV camera to your temperature sensor to your light is actually talking to the cloud. You get to, build analytics, not in terms of data, but in terms of usage patterns on how people are using the buildings, and thereby derive energy efficiency. And when you start talking about that kind of level of communication and things like that, you're talking about massive amounts of data, right? You think about now, just transactional data of, okay, you've deposited money into your account, so there's an update that goes. It has the sum, the account number, maybe some security key, that's all that goes. Versus now you're talking about 100 sensors in a building or 1,000 sensors in a building, every second updating temperature. You're talking about massive amounts of data and then massive amounts of processing that need to happen. So I feel that IoT is going to bring the next big requirement from cloud, in Sri Lanka at least. It's already happening around the world, but in Sri Lanka, it's starting to happen now.
Okay, gentlemen, I think we have heard wonderful thoughts from these experts here. I think it would have sparked a lot of thinking among the audience here. I think it's time for the audience to speak out, so we can open the arena for the audience. You have any queries, you can question the panelists here. Amazing, no questions? There.
Can I be considered part of the audience now?
Yeah, why not? Yes.
Yeah.
Let's start with Dr.
A question from our colleague at Mobitel. You talked about response times. Now, this is a question that we ask always when we go into a forum like this. How would you compare the response times in a virtualized setup versus where you are running your own dedicated servers? Do you see a lot of difference? Or?
There is a difference. There is a difference. Now, in the virtualization technology, even though we use virtualization technology, certainly we have to use to utilize the hardware. We have certain application where certain resources has been dedicated. Say, for example, 2 cores or 4 cores is dedicated. On top of that, if there's any request, it will share the shared pool. So basically, in the virtualized environment itself, we have segregated the resources in between tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where tier 1 is the highest response time, we can assure that. Tier 2 is marginally works fine, even with that. So tier 3, maybe development, the staging environments, that sort of thing. So it's sort of a dedicated resource. We have segregated an environment, tier 1, with the dedicated resources beyond the certain level. So that makes sure that the application response time works fine. As of to now, it works fine.
I think, yes, you can ask the question, yes.
Yes, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to ask the questions. Now that there are a lot of cloud providers and top runners are Microsoft, Amazons, and Googles. Now, much of the debates in the academia, and there has been much of research done on the cloud offering and cloud computing and also and so. My question is that there's a question of the trust and trustworthiness of the cloud provider themselves. Whether they would divulge their cloud infrastructure in terms of what they say. So, I mean, they say we offer cloud services on top of VMware or other commercialized products. Do they divulge their key metrics or their infrastructure details to the customers? I think there might be some sort of protocols available for the customers to get any information from the cloud providers about their offering. But do they honestly divulge their key infrastructure and in terms of security and how do they compliance and all that? I mean, my question is that is there any way for the customer to compare the service offering from customers? And Microsoft says we offer this service as far better than the Google, and Google say, okay, don't worry about their infrastructure, we are very ahead with our infrastructure. I mean, for the users to query and get the compliance, especially whether they comply with the certain security standards, and there are now the threats, landscape concerns, there are a lot of happening, things are going on. For example, that the Salesforce, they were attacked, and there were a lot of questions. I mean, my simple question is there any way we can measure the trust and trustworthiness of the cloud providers themselves?
Excellent question, sir. This is, in fact, the fundamental, most challenging question that most of our customers also have about cloud. I mean, in a nutshell, do we simply do what we say we're going to do on cloud with your data, right? I don't know how Amazon or Google does this. I can't talk on behalf of them, but on behalf of Microsoft, if you go to this website called Azure Trust Center, you will find all the details on how we handle data privacy, then all the data governance, who can access what and all that. So it's a very transparent process. Very simplest rule is what you host on our cloud is owned by you. We only provide the infrastructure or the services for you to utilize. The data is not owned by Microsoft. So you have the liberty to do anything that you prefer with your data. Then on your question on, do we have an option to compare the security architecture or the hardware capabilities or anything so a customer can take a better decision? That's a bit of a complicated question because there are certain proprietary technologies that we have built in our own, which we would not obviously divulge. But there are certain architectures, designs, blueprints that we are sharing with customers on a need-to-know basis. If you have a very serious requirement, I'm happy to take offline conversation with you to provide the necessary details. I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, yes.
So obviously, I think Wellington is far more qualified to answer that question, but one thing that I can say, and your question might be a little bit deeper than the insight that I can offer to you in terms of data security and the actual data and what happens and where it's stored and so on. But as far as like to evaluate people, something that I do personally when I do due diligence studies and things like that for my clients is we look at standards compliance, right? So if a cloud service provider is ISO 27000 compliant or PCI DSS compliant, when they have those compliances, that means they've gone through the process of getting certified, doing what is necessary to achieve those certifications. And those certifications also hold true. I mean, there's infrastructure certifications as well, right? There's ISO 24000 something that's for disaster recovery and business continuity. There's infrastructure standards like TIA 942 or uptime. So when you're evaluating your service providers, I think other than the deep things that Wellington sort of touched on a base level, see if they've certified their infrastructure. And then start doing some comparisons and see what's important to you. Like if you're a bank, then PCI DSS compliance might be important to you. And if Microsoft has it and their competitor doesn't, then it may be a good reason to go with Microsoft.
I think we can go for the question.
There I have two questions. One is, so when it comes to the operation of data center, the power is a primary factor. Like for example, the big players like Facebook and Google, they are more migrating to like Scandinavian countries for cheaper hydropower as well as closer to glaciers for cooling, cheaper cooling as well. So when you design a data center like in a country like here in Sri Lanka where we have very unreliable grid power, and keeping measures to make sure that you can run throughout any interruption. So what are the cost factors included when you design, like how much you have to spend more when compared to operating in a country where you can have cheap power and cooling facilities?
To get the question.
I think
Yeah.
the voice was
not audible
very,
enough,
very
but
clear,
yeah.
I briefly understood. I think you're asking about the power utilization and how that affects to the operating cost of the data center environment, is it?
Yeah, reliability of the power and the cost.
Okay.
Power reliability and cost.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, I think Tarindu could answer that better.
Yeah. So if you're talking about Sri Lanka in specific and power reliability and things like that, I mean, we always complain about CEB and we say that, power reliability in Sri Lanka is bad. That's actually not the case. Power reliability is in general quite good, especially in Colombo, right? I mean, we do have outages and things like that, but in general, it's quite good. As far as, I mean, your question is something that I face every day because I do data center designs. And as far as the major international data center standards are concerned, like the two big ones are the uptime tier topology and TIA 942. And then there are a few others. There's BIC C002, EN50, there are a few others, right? But all of them always consider generator power as your primary source of power. You don't always have to run on generator, but you have to make sure that you have generators that can run 24/7, 365 for the rest of eternity, provided that there is fuel to power your data center. And then you only use the grid power as an alternate, which is cheaper. So in terms of setting up your infrastructure, yes, there is, if you want to, I mean, also the standards work in tiers, right? So there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Different standards call it different names, levels, ratings, and so on. But depending on what you're building to, the costs will increase depending on the level of reliability and the level of fault tolerance that you want. I hope that answers the question.
Because we are tired of time, shall we limit one more question?
Is it okay to me to ask 3 questions from 3 audience, 3 people? One is from Mustali. Mustali, how secure we are to run local data center? Do we have enough number of security auditing people to audit your data center in Sri Lanka? That's from Mustali. Because when you are capable of doing that, hopefully Microsoft will bring their servers to your center. That one. Second, from Wellington. Wellington, do we need a huge case, business case to bring that Microsoft to Sri Lanka? Or we don't have much data that to keep it in local server? You're thinking that still the bandwidth cost will be less than the data what we are uploading to the outside. That's from Wellington. And Tarindu, is there any hurdles that to bring down equipments through TRC? Because we need the infrastructure. So we have so many issues to build the infrastructure because so many cases are there for the TRC. So if we have hurdles on that, so definitely we can't bring down the disease. So how you experience? Please, we can start from Mustali.
the good question, Ziam. Yeah. So we make sure that we have not modified the customer data by making certain compliance like Sec 17A, Sec 17A rules. So that sort of rules or kind of a warm write once, read many compliance that we made within our data center that make sure that the customer informations are not modified at all. So that, I mean, let me put this question again, that you may go and ask any banking sector or banking employees that they would have modified your data, so that they make sure that those data are not modified according to the certain compliance. So in fact, we need to have enough auditors to kind of compliance or the regulation compliance that regularly monitor. But of course, the banking sector and all they are regularly monitoring their data and the compliance standard. So we also comply to the certain standard to make sure that the customer data are not modified.
So on the question of, okay, what would be that business case like? It's way beyond my pay grade to answer that question, to be very honest. In terms of scale that we're talking about, right? So right now, Microsoft operates in 46 different regions with our data centers. So each of these data centers are costing over $500 million to build. We are talking about 500,000 to 600,000 blades within one of these buildings. I mean, most of these data centers are actually huge buildings which you can park maybe 6 or 7 Airbus A380s inside it. So I don't know whether Sri Lanka as a country has the capacity to have a massive data center like that. I don't know the answer to that.
It's your turn.
Yeah, so about the regulatory and the TRC and building infrastructure and all of that. So regulatory compliance in Sri Lanka is a little bit difficult, whether it comes from TRC or in other projects that I've been involved in, sometimes from BOI and getting certification and approvals and so on, to import infrastructure, especially when it's something new that hasn't been seen before. They kind of get the approval document and they're wondering what is this, and then it becomes a huge hassle to go through it. But I believe that that's why forums like this or organizations like this are very important, so that as the key stakeholders of the business, that we can drive regulators to make our lives easier mutually, and thereby the services better to the community.
Okay, I think because we are tied up for time, let's conclude the session for today. For this, the panel discussion. I'm sure we have learned a lot from various thoughts, various lines of thinking coming from our experts, and I'm sure you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I thank Dr. Nimal and Tharindu and Wellington and Mustalif. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, all our panel members, the moderator and so on, for giving that very fruitful panel discussion. Now, I also want to invite Professor Gihan Dias to give a plaque to our panel moderator, Subhash. Also, actually, we want to invite Dr. Nimal Ratnayaka to receive your plaque. Okay, and also Wellington Pereira, thank you very much for your contribution as well. Okay, thanks a lot, Professor Gihan. And also we want to invite Dr. Ajanta. Oh, he's left. Okay. We'll invite Dr. Shanta to give flags to our two other panelists as well. So let's invite Tarindu. Okay, and also Mustali, yes. Okay, thank you, Dr. Shanta, yes. All right, so we are into the next speaker now. So let's invite Tushara. So Tushara is Tushara Jayawardena, and Tushara is from SLT. And Tushara will take us through the next gen wireless technologies. Over to you, Tushara.